I know that I said that I was only going to focus on one printer a month and that the CR-10S was going to be my printer for April. But unbeknownst to you, I was actually working on the Tevo Tornado in the makerspace at the same time, where people could help me on it and we could put a lot of time and effort into the Tevo Tornado. So we get to compare these two printers head to head. Tevo Tornado versus CR-10S. Is it worth the extra money for the CR-10S? Let's find out now. So here's how this is going to work. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I was doing with the CR-10S, then I'll tell you a little bit about what I was doing with the Tevo Tornado around the same time. And as I go back and forth, it's possible I might find myself getting a little heated. And if that happens, I'm just going to take a little break, show you guys a clip from the video that I have created for the Low Poly Dino Kickstarter, and then I'm going to put on a tie. I don't normally wear a tie in the shed, but you know, I actually find them calming. In the shed, they get dirty and we don't want dangling cloth when we're using a 3D printing with 3D printer with moving equipment. But I might need a tie or two to relax a little bit today. Let's start comparing these two printers head to head. So you guys saw me unbox the CR-10S, got it up and assembled and running, and actually ran my first print that day. I called him a gargoyle abomination, but turns out he's from a monster movie in China, and they call him a white radish or white turnip. And those are arms, not wings like I thought they were. Okay, there we go. So first print taken care of. Meanwhile, the Tevo Tornado went to the makerspace. Now, I want to back up just a second on the Tevo. I had already assembled the Tevo mostly before taking it to the makerspace, and remember when I did that there was a print on the print bed. Now, if you got a 3D printer and there was a print on its print bed, what would you think? Would you think that this meant that that print had been done on this 3D printer and that meant that this 3D printer was good to go and ready? I did. Even though the print bed wasn't on the printer, and that should have been a huge hint to me, I thought that that meant that this printer was good to go. And so, well, we'll find out what happens next. First, I needed to slice a 3D model because there was no sample print on the SD card. In fact, the SD card on the Tevo Tornado is completely blank. There's no software, there's no manuals, and there's no test print on it whatsoever. A bit odd, but all right. So I fire up Cura and I decide I need to make a Tevo Tornado profile, and I go online to find out what the settings are for the Tevo Tornado profile, and the response from the community is, oh, don't do that. Just use the settings from the CR-10. Yes, the Tevo Tornado is so much mimicking the properties of the CR-10 that you don't use your own slicer profile for it, you use its slicer profile for it. They might as well have just called this machine the Tevo CR-10. So where was I? Oh yes, test print. So I fire up and slice up this model, the Spiral Tower, which I downloaded off of Colts 3D. You can't get this one, whoops, on Thingiverse. And I like it because it's got gentle overhangs. It doesn't need any supports to print. It prints just fine the way that it is. And so I sliced it up and started printing. Now this one I did not print on the Tevo. I printed this one on the CR-10, but later, because right now I noticed this first print that I got from it, I barely got an inch off the build plate and I was seeing some nasty Y-axis sliding on this thing. The Y-axis was just slipping like crazy. Now I assumed at first that maybe the belt wasn't tight, but as I searched online, as I searched the community, It turns out that these machines shipped with the Y-axis stepper driver, underpowering the motors. So before I could even get my first successful print out of this printer, I had to open up the electronics and turn a screw on the Y-axis stepper to adjust the resistance of that to send more power to the Y-axis motor because it was underpowered out of the box. And this is when I learned, first of all, I have to I have to do open electronic surgery on this thing before I could get a good print out of it. You know what that means? That means that that print that was on the print bed wasn't done on this printer. They did it on another printer, and then it... I will admit that the Tevo Tornado does do one thing that the CR-10 doesn't. My biggest complaint about the CR-10 is how the filament runs so close to the Z lead screw, and they actually fixed this with a rather clever lever mechanism that you feed the filament through. And so I'm thinking, yeah, that's one good thing. I'll keep up with this thing and see if I can find more things to complement it on. So we finally get the Y-axis powered properly. After several more failed prints, we make sure that we have to crank that thing up a lot more than we expected. We had to take the electronics apart many times. And then we try to print this part entirely. And we get this print to work, but it's delaminating. It's falling apart. It's like... I couldn't tell if the nozzle was getting clogged or if something else was wrong. And the nozzle was definitely getting clogged, and it seemed to me like the problem was that the build plate was too high and that it was scraping against the nozzle, causing backwash in the nozzle and causing a jam and causing it to print funny, and I removed the nozzles and cleaned them out. Meanwhile, I should mention over here on the CR-10, I actually did print that one perfectly on the first try, and it was different filament, so I thought, well, maybe the filament's the problem. This one was done with the furling filament that you saw me review in the last video. I'm also printing these hammers for my mom. They're hammer dulcimer hammers, and I'm using the CR-10 because it's tall enough to do it, to print standing upright. Hammer dulcimer, it's an instrument. I'm experimenting. I'm having a good time with this printer. I'm getting prints off of it, and I'm trying stuff new. And whereas with the Tevo, well, I'm trying to level this build plate, and the knobs that they have on here are really painful to use. They're very... I don't know what's wrong with them, but I keep hurting my fingers trying to use them, and so I print off these knobs that I can put over their knobs to make them easier to turn. And while they do work, first of all, I had to print these knobs on a different printer because this thing wasn't printing. And secondly, the only ones that I could find for the Tevo Tornado are really jaggy. They've got these really, really sharp, pointy edges, and I'm wondering, do people who use Tevos just like pain? I apologize. I shouldn't have said that. It was out of line. I just got tired of hurting myself one way only to go hurting myself another way, but I could have really easily fixed this. I could have smoothed off the edges or made my own gears or whatever. It's my own fault for using that piece. I'm sorry, I didn't mean what I said. Meanwhile, with the CR-10S, at this point, I'm starting to play with Pet G. I got some Pet G from my friends at CC Tree, and I will put a link to where you can check out their Pet G. This is really my first time playing with Pet G, believe it or not. I've played with Pet, but not Pet G. And maybe in the comments, somebody can explain to me why people like Pet G so much. I cannot get this stuff to stop stringing every time I use it. I'm using it because it's more food safe than other filaments, and I've got a project that needs to be in contact with food. So I'm using that roll inside, but I did print off at least one supporter tile with it. So hey, thank you very much to Michael Grugel for your support, and I'm going to put this on my Patreon wall. And yeah, I'm really enjoying playing with the CR-10, but I kind of hit my first snag. The glass bed, which I had coated with hairspray and done up just the way you're supposed to with hairspray. Boom, video about doing that, which again, safety first when you're using hairspray, especially around 3D printers. But for some reason it wasn't sticking anymore, and I suspect it's because it's so dusty in here. So I'm gonna play with some other build plate options to get it to stick on here. But I'm having successes. Even in my failures, I feel like I can manage them. But with the Tevo, I am still at a loss as to what the problem is. So I finally get the bed leveled, and the prints still aren't coming out right. I even go as far as to change. Yeah. I took off the original build plate that was on here and put on the spare one that they sent me. They sent me a spare one, and I had, you know, scratched this up in trying to get prints on it. You know, it's funny, a guy at the Makerspace, Isaac, you met him at the at another one of my videos. He said that I should take this and hang this on the wall, and I was like, oh no, and I realized that this was like the flag, the red cape in front of a bull. Put this up on a wall, and I was going to be nothing but red eyes. So I'm still troubleshooting the problem with the Tevo. I'm thinking I've replaced the build plate, I've replaced the nozzle, maybe it's the feed mechanism. And that's when I remember something. A little bag that's been with this the whole time. The Tevo Titan extruder assembly. I didn't think anything of it at the time. In fact, I asked some people at the Makerspace, I said, does this look to you any different than the one that's already on there? And we all agreed and decided that no, it was exactly the same. There was no reason. There was no reason to replace that one with this one. Unless there was. Unless Tevo knew that the feed mechanism that they had on this machine was somehow broken. And instead of fixing it, and instead of telling me to fix it, they just took the parts, bunged them in the box, and expected me to figure it out without a word of explanation or anything whatsoever. That is the last. To be fair, we're not comparing apples to apples here. The Tevo Tornado is significantly cheaper than the CR-10S. It's even cheaper than the regular CR-10 by about 50 bucks, I think. Don't get me wrong, I might have that wrong, so check your prices in the description. And so if you decided to buy the Tevo because you just didn't think that you could afford the extra money for the CR-10, then, and if I had paid money for the Tevo, I might be inclined to stick with it. I might try and figure this out and actually get it working, and I might actually succeed. I might figure out how to get this thing all working, and I would probably find community in doing so. I would find a group of people who, like me, had to put up with the problems and frustrations of an undocumented experience. And I would feel a kinship to these people. And then when I saw somebody else online who was bad-mouthing this machine that I had created and am maybe finally getting good prints out of, and I saw them saying bad things about it, well, there's two things you can do in that case. You can either sit back, get introspective, and realize that, yeah, you know what? I might have made a bad choice. I should have spent a couple more dollars and gotten a slightly better machine that might actually work. Or you can attack the person who's attacking that thing and your community by extension and tell them that they're wrong and make them suffer in any way that you possibly can, because that's easier than admitting that you might have made a mistake. I don't know. I might do that if I were willing to stick with this. But I'm not willing to stick with this. I'm tired of this machine. I'm tired of the time that it wasted. I'm tired of Tevo sending me a kit packaged as a complete 3D printer. This might be a good 3D printer in components. It might have easier to upgrade components. It might have a better motherboard. I will never know, and other people might know, but the fact that they send it to you in an incomplete state and pretend like it's the full deal and ready to go, and there's not a word of documentation about what you have to do to get it up and running, that, to me, is unacceptable. Yeah, the CR-10, it might not be able to upgrade so well in the future because its circuitry is a little bit more closed. Now, that's not so much true for the CR-10S, and I haven't experimented with this, but my understanding is that the CR-10S has a bootloader on it, which means that you can really easily upgrade its firmware. I haven't done that, but I probably should. The other thing that the CR-10S has over the CR-10 is, well, three things. It's got the bootloader, it's got the filament out detection, which I tested and had fun with, and it worked. And it's got, well, we weren't quite sure how they did it, but it's got print resume capability. In other words, when the print fails or power turns off, when the power comes back on, you can set it to keep going with the print. And we weren't sure how they were doing that, and there was a big boycott to figure out how they did it and to get their firmware from them, and we got it. And it turns out what they're doing we don't want to do, because what they're doing is every time the CR-10S, the firmware for the CR-10S, prints one command of G-code, it uses a file that they call bin and just kind of bookmarks where we are in the G-code. Run G-code, write to the SD card. Run G-code, write to the SD card. Run G-code, write to the SD card. And if you know anything about SD cards, you already are cringing. If you don't, let me explain. SD cards are the most volatile of volatile media. They only have a lifetime of a certain number of writes that you can do to them. You can read all day long. They're fine reading, but writes, they eventually run out of, and when they do, they're dead, and you're just going to have to replace the SD card. So that is a feature that, while now a part of the Marlin firmware, is, I believe, by default turned off. And it's recommended that we update our firmware on our CR-10s and CR-10Ss to remove that feature, because it's going to ruin your SD card, and it's not worth being able to occasionally restore a print when the power goes out. Overall, though, the CR-10S has the capability of doing that upgrade easier than a regular CR-10, because a regular CR-10 doesn't have the bootloader. So that's a question. Is the CR-10S worth the feature on the firmware that we probably shouldn't be using, the ability to update that firmware easier, and filament runout detection? I don't know. And I'm going to leave that choice entirely up to you. Personally, I think the filament runout detection is worth the price of admission. It's worth the increased price to me, simply because with a big 3D printer, you don't want to run out of material partway through that print. You want to be able to stop the print and add more filament if that ever happens, when that happens, because you got a big printer and you're going to be doing big prints, and that's gonna happen. So I think it's worth it, but I will leave that decision to you. I will have links for, yes, I'll have links for GearBest, but lately I've also been doing Amazon links, and I hope that you guys appreciate that, so that you can buy the CR10 or the CR-10S, or if you want the Tevo Tornado. I'm not going to tell you not to go with this machine, but I will tell you that I'm going to strip this machine down for parts, and I'm going to build an egg bot out of it, because I am just done with this machine. It's wasted too much of my time, and I'm sorry, I cannot endorse it, but I'm not going to tell you to stay away from it. Just wanted you to know my experience with CR-10S and the Tevo Tornado. And there you go. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Hope it amused you a little bit. As always, if I've got something else to say that I haven't remembered to say in this video, I will put it in the comment section, in the pinned comment, with a link to my blog where you can get more information about that. I've been writing on my blog recently because I've been so busy getting this Kickstarter for the low poly dynos up and running that I just haven't had time to record videos. And so I have a couple of blog posts there, including a follow-up review on the Geeetech E180. I finally opened that second one, and I tell you a little bit about that. Stay away. But that said, I want to thank you very much for sticking with me to this point. I want to thank my Patreon backers, because you guys, Patreon and direct backers, you guys, your support is more necessary than ever. And if you're just waiting for a way to do a one-time support, the Low Poly Dino Kickstarter is coming soon, so I'll have a link to where you can sign up for the mailing list on that in the description. And as always, safety first. I'll see you next time. Do you want to know more about 3D printing but don't know where to start? Or did you buy a 3D printer but you need some help getting it going? Don't panic. The Beginner's Guide to the 3D Printing Galaxy is here, now, for you. Buy it on Amazon. Well, didn't quite summon Thulu today, but boy, we came close.